I have worked as a miner for the last 30 years. At 51 years old, I have seen a lot, if not everything. For 20 years, I worked in a deep mine, until one day I was crushed in a collapse. After that, I switched to open source development. Then my marriage, which lasted 17 years, also ended. It's been 9 years since I got divorced. If it weren't for that incident in the mine, I would never have known that Brenda cheated on me. But I'll tell you about this later. Now I want to talk about those college idiots who have nothing better to do than picket our mine. They do this every year in honor of Earth Day. We know that these vigils will begin about a week before Earth Day and will continue until the weekend after. Students don't even really understand what they are doing and why. They think it has something to do with protecting natural resources. I walked up to my truck while they were yelling at us miners, insulting us with every word they could think of. We have long been accustomed to this and do not pay much attention. Some of the young miners always want to come up and start an argument with the students. We elders know that this is useless. Our companies don't want conflict because it will attract media attention, and we don't want that. The less attention we pay to students, the less likely there is to be conflict. After work, my miner friends and I went to the local pub to have a couple of beers, as usual. This makes it easier to relax after a hard day at work, and the work of a miner is really hard. We usually discuss political topics or, for example, this Earth Day topic. Don't get me wrong, we want the Earth to be clean and well-groomed just like everyone else. But we don't think that young people understand how everything works. They won't shut down the entire mining industry with a sign on the picket line, and if that ever happened, our civilization would cease to exist in its current form. Speaking about third world countries, we ourselves would find ourselves in the position of a fourth world country. My friend Mike decided to defuse the situation and told me about the letter he had received the day before. The letter explained what some of the words the women used meant. He took the letter out of his pocket and read it to us. Mike said this. The letter was called 9 Words Women Use. 1. Good. This is the word women use to stop arguing when they are right, and it's time for you to shut up. 2. 5 minutes. If she gets dressed, that means half an hour. 5 minutes is only 5 minutes if you are given it to watch the game before helping around the house. 3. Nothing. This is the calm before the storm. This means that something has happened and you need to be alert. Arguments that start with nothing usually end with okay. 4. Come on. This is a challenge, not a resolution. Don't do this. 5. Loud sigh. This is also a word, although non-verbal, often misunderstood by men. A loud sigh means she thinks you're an idiot and wonders why she's wasting her time on you. 6. It's okay. This is one of the most dangerous things a woman can say to a man. It means she wants to think carefully before deciding how and when you will pay for it. 7. Thank you. A woman thanks you, don't ask, don't doubt, just say please. But if she says, thank you so much, that's pure sarcasm, and she's not thanking you at all. 8. Whatever you want. A feminine way of saying, fuck you. 9. Don't worry, I'm on my own. Another dangerous expression. It means that the woman has already asked you to do this several times, and now she's doing it herself. Later the man will ask, what happened? And she will answer, nothing. We all laughed. Married guys said they deal with this every day. I thought back to my time with Brenda and realized that Mike's description was quite accurate. After another glass of beer, we went home. Of course, I went to my apartment where I have lived for the past 9 years. I'm used to living alone. Sometimes I visited one of my daughters. Both were already married, and I became the grandfather of 3 grandchildren. The eldest, Cheryl, had 2 children, the youngest, Sue, a son. I guess it's time to talk about my mining accident and my unfaithful wife. Let's go back to when we met. This was many years ago. I had just turned 21 and my friend said he wanted to throw me a big birthday party. There are parties every weekend in colleges. Usually they only allow students, but my friend Jerry studied there. I had just started working in a deep mine, but I was the same age as many students. I'll be honest, it was one of the wildest parties I've ever seen. There was booze and loud music everywhere. Some smoked. I tried it once, but I didn't like it. It gave me a headache. The more people drank, the louder and wilder they became. The girls danced seductively, and the guys tried to grab them for something. The further the night went, the more couples went into the rooms. I thought they were probably going to have sex. Some were having fun right there, in plain sight. I was standing watching a girl please a guy when someone tapped me on the shoulder. "Hello, are you Rob?" A pleasant-looking girl whom I had seen before with another guy told me. "Yes, I'm Rob. How can I help?" I smiled. "Your friend Jerry said you turned 21 today." "This is true." "Exactly. What's your name?" I asked. "My name is Brenda. I'm in my last year of college. I just wanted to wish you a happy birthday." She leaned over and kissed me. At that moment, I felt her tongue, which was pressing demandingly against my lips, and I opened my mouth. Almost automatically, I put my arms around her, placing my hands on her hips, and pulled her closer. She began to kiss me even more passionately, and I felt my pulse quicken. "Come with me, Rob," she said. I didn't say a word as she took my hand and led me upstairs to one of the rooms. Closing the door behind her, she returned to me and started kissing me again. I reached to unbuckle her belt and unzipped her jeans. She turned her back to me, and I lowered my hand and slid down her panties. With my hand, I felt her warm skin. She moaned softly. I was so that every muscle was already aching. Removing my hand, I began to take off my jeans, and in the meantime, she took off her clothes, remaining in a pink lace set. When I kicked off my boots and pants, she knelt down, pulled down my panties, and gave me pleasure. Honestly, it was wonderful. Later, I found out that she is 2 years older than me. Lying on the bed, she pulled me towards her. I tried my best to please her as she held my head and held me close to her. After a few hours, we were both exhausted but happy. Afterwards, Brenda helped me get Jerry out, who had fallen asleep in the living room. I kissed Brenda goodbye and said I would be glad to see her again. She said that she often goes to such parties and would be glad to meet me. The next morning, I thanked Jerry for the invitation. He said I could come whenever I wanted. And about Brenda, he said that she was a cheerful girl and that they were just friends. She never dated him, preferring older guys. She asked who I was when we arrived, and when he said it was my birthday, she took matters into her own hands. I worked most weekends, so I couldn't go to these parties often. But one Saturday, I still managed to get out. Of course, I immediately started looking for Brenda and saw her sitting on some guy's lap. A little upset, I turned away, but then she noticed me. Brenda jumped off his lap and came to me with such a passionate kiss that all my negativity disappeared. "It's good to see you again, Rob. I thought it was a one-time thing. I asked Jerry about you, and he said that you work as a miner. This is true." "Yes, I work in a deep mine. Usually night shifts, so it's hard to find time, but I really wanted to see you. You haven't left my mind since our first meeting." "Me too," Brenda said. "We spent that night together without leaving each other. In my entire life, I have never met a woman who could compare to Brenda. The things she did to me seemed straight out of the movies. Is it possible to fall in love with someone because of sex? I had never felt such feelings for a woman before. I was actually at one party before it came out. We told each other that we would try to keep in touch. It turned out that she lived only 25 miles from me. I wrote down her phone number and told her that we could see each other from time to time. She replied that she would have liked it. After its release, I again completely immersed myself in work. On one of my free Saturdays, I called Brenda. She was glad to hear from me, and we agreed to meet. Then she told me about herself. Brenda was 24 years old, and she got a job as a secretary in a large company in her city. For now, she lived with her parents, but soon she was going to rent an apartment. She graduated from high school and attended state college. She had boyfriends in the past, but she said she wasn't ready for a serious relationship. We've been dating for about 6 months. I called her almost every day and tried to see her at least a couple times a week. When she moved into her apartment, We spent almost all our free time there. I haven't been with another woman since I started dating Brenda. She said that she had given up dating other men and that I was the only one she wanted to be with. I realized that I was falling in love with her. She was in my thoughts every day. I wanted to propose to her, but I was a little afraid of her past. I knew that she had a turbulent student years. I was a part of them myself. One day, after a movie and another night together, she asked what was bothering me. "Brenda, I love you, but—" "That's good, isn't it?" she interrupted. "I love you too. For a long time. So what's the problem?" "Honey, this is your past. I know you've had other men, and—" "So what? You've had women too. I haven't been to anyone since we started dating. I have lived through a turbulent youth, just like you. Now is the Roman 21st century. Men and women are equal. Or don't you think so?" "No, I mean, hell yeah, that's not the point, Brenda. I want to forget your past while it remains in the past. I don't need other women. You're the only one I want. And you are the only one for me. We will succeed. I love you, Robert Mathies, only you." Soon after this conversation, we got married. Everything was fine. She stopped taking the pills, and over the next 4 years, we had 2 beautiful daughters. After their birth, Brenda worked part-time and was a wonderful mother and wife. I continued to work in the mine and devoted my free time to my family. We spent a lot of time together while the girls were growing up. Brenda and I also spent several evenings a week together, enjoying each other. Everything was great until the girls entered high school and Brenda decided to return to work full-time. I worked night shifts in a deep mine, and Brenda worked day shifts in the office. It was difficult for us to see each other. When I was at home, the girls were often nearby, and we had very little time. Our relationship turned into hugs and kisses, but intimacy became less frequent than once a month. The situation got worse when I was given shifts from 7 in the evening to 7 in the morning. Now I had to work from 7 in the evening to 7 in the morning, and also every other Saturday. The salary was good, but my personal life was going downhill. Brenda, too, was no longer as gentle as before. I thought that her work was also tiring her, and I didn't want to disturb her again. I noticed that Brenda began to go out with her friends more often. I didn't blame her after all. Her friends, Joyce and Ellen, were also married, and I was sure that they were just chatting and relaxing. There was no reason to suspect anything was wrong. One evening before leaving for work, I kissed my daughters goodnight and told them I would see them in the morning. Brenda was getting dressed up to meet her friends and have a couple of cocktails. She was wearing black lace lingerie and looked amazing. She said that she would be back by 11 and that she just needed to unwind a little. I kissed her goodbye and went to work. There were 8 of us in a team working in one section of the mine. We had only been there for a couple of hours when we heard a sudden crash and saw a huge cloud of black dust. There was a collapse and we were buried. The only source of light was the flashlights on our helmets. We were scared to death. I looked at my colleagues and saw that some of them were hurt. It was difficult to see how serious the injuries were. I tried to get up, but immediately collapsed back to the ground. My leg hurt a lot. It felt like it was either badly bruised or broken. We found ourselves in a small space measuring about 2.5 meters. We had some water, but no food. We tried to assess our condition. 3 of us were wounded. 4 said they seemed to be safe, but of course everyone was scared and shocked. Only Charlie didn't seem to move. He was at the doorway when the collapse happened and the beam hit him on the head. We believed that he was dead. One of the guys checked for a pulse, but there was none. We knew that we needed to remain calm and hope that we would be rescued soon. Joe, one of the miners, picked up an air hose that had broken during the collapse. This meant that we had little air. We tried to sit quietly and save air, waiting for them to pull us out. We were too deep to try to get out on our own. Also, we didn't know how badly the mine had collapsed. As far as we understood, we were cut off from the rest of the world. I'll tell you that the first thing you think about at such a moment is your family. Their whole life flashes before their eyes. I thought about Brenda and how happy we were when we found out she was pregnant. You remember the moments when you shouted at your children and regret it. Yes, some of us cried, wondering if we would ever see our loved ones again. We had been there for about 3 hours when we heard a noise. Joe thought it might be another collapse. No, Joe, it's a big rig. I think they found us. There's a chance we'll get out of here. The next thing we saw was a huge drill coming through the wall next to us. We saw a large pipe being pushed through. We knew that air would be supplied to us. After another 20 minutes, we felt air entering the vent in the room. They rescued us after another 3 hours. The only part of the mine that collapsed was the area where we were. They managed to enter through the main shaft, strengthen it, remove piles of earth, stones and coal, and get to us. We were carried out one by one on stretchers. The 2 wounded miners were raised first, then Charles, who was indeed dead. Then the 3 healthy miners were carried up, and Joe told me to go up next, and he would go up last. We were the 2 most experienced workers on our shift. It was dark, only rays of light illuminated the entrance to the mine. I heard screams of joy as I was pulled out. The families of all the miners were waiting for them. I was taken to a makeshift first aid station. My 2 daughters ran up to me and hugged me tightly. They were both crying. Behind them was my sister Betty, who had brought them over so they could see me. When I asked about Brenda, Betty said they tried to call her on her cell phone, but the phone was off and they didn't know where she was. We were all taken to the hospital. They were going to leave us there at least overnight for an examination. 1 miner had a broken arm, another had a broken leg. The other 4 had bruises and could probably go home in the morning after the examination. As for me, I had serious bruises on my thigh and calf. The leg was sprained, but not broken. The doctor said I would probably have to stay in the hospital for a couple of days and then use crutches for a few weeks. Betty and the girls came to see me after the examination, and I told them I would see them in the morning. Of course, they said they loved me, and all 3 of them kissed and hugged me. I knew Betty had noticed my concern about where Brenda was, but I knew it was best not to mention it. After all, I had just escaped death. The doctor gave me painkillers, and I fell asleep, but before that I still had time to think about where my wife was. The next morning, I woke up to see Brenda sitting in a chair with tears in her eyes. I didn't know what to tell her, so I just asked her a direct question. Brenda, where were you last night? Betty and the girls were here, but I didn't see you. Forgive me, dear. I was with my friends from work and lost track of time. When I returned home, I saw a note from the girls and immediately went to the hospital. But when I arrived, they didn't let me see you. They said you're not in intensive care, so I can't see you until the morning. I came as soon as I could. How do you feel? But that wasn't the end yet. I thought it best not to start an argument yet. There weren't many places she could be before 4 in the morning, and I was going to find out where. I have severe bruises and my ankle is sprained. I'll have to walk on crutches for 2 weeks. Charlie died, you know? Mel's leg is broken. The rest are a little beaten up, but will recover. I'm so sorry for Charlie's family. They were all there when he was taken out of the mine. Where were you when your TV didn't even work? Rob, forget about me now. I'm here, and that's what matters. We need to focus on your recovery. That's the only thing that matters now. She leaned over and kissed me tenderly. I knew she was hiding something. I needed to understand what exactly. I was about to talk about it again, but then my daughters came into the room. Betty bought them. They hugged and kissed me and cried. These were the best daughters a man could ever dream of. I had to give Brenda credit for that. She was a great mother. The doctor said I could go home on Monday, and Brenda said she would take the day off to pick me up from the hospital. Betty suggested that Brenda not miss work. She would come for me because she did not work outside the home. That's what we did. Betty came, took me home, and stayed to talk for a while. She knew something was bothering me, and she knew it had to do with where Brenda was that night. Rob, I don't know where Brenda was that night. Just give her a chance to explain herself. Talk to her. Listen to what she has to say. Don't let it eat you up from the inside. Call me if you need anything. After these words, Betty left. I was on crutches, but I wanted to look around the house and try to find out for myself. It was as if there was a fear inside me that Brenda wasn't there for me when I needed her the most. I hobbled around the house and realized that I could move around quite well. The first thing I did was check the laundry basket. I remember reading stories about women leaving evidence there. I remembered what she was wearing that evening, a black lingerie set. I kissed her goodbye before leaving for work. When I looked in the basket, her bra was there. There were no marks on him, but where did the panties from the same set go? I rummaged through the laundry basket and looked under the bed. Where are they? Then I opened her drawer, and there they were, clean and washed. I was concerned why she suddenly decided to immediately wash her underwear and put it back. She usually didn't do this. Even if she decided to wash her underwear, why didn't she wash her bra too? No, she was clearly hiding something. She must have washed them as soon as she returned from meeting her friends or after visiting me in the hospital. My stomach churned with anxious thoughts. But this was not enough to accuse her of infidelity. To be honest, I was hoping I was wrong. I checked all our phones for call IDs. All past messages were erased, with the exception of those received the day before. I felt some kind of sixth sense or intuition and headed to the basement. It was extremely difficult to go down the stairs on crutches. Almost no one used the basement anymore. It became something of a warehouse where we kept unnecessary things. I remembered that many years ago we installed a telephone there when the laundry room was still downstairs, in case the call found us in the basement. If I'm not mistaken, it also had a call ID. I went to the phone and looked at the call list. There were 60 messages there, which meant that no one had deleted them for a long time. Old messages were erased only after new ones arrived. The messages were dated more than a month ago. If someone called frequently, it would show the last call and the number of calls. Most of the calls were from relatives and friends. When I got to Friday, the day before my accident, I saw a call from one Brian Cooter. It was a cell phone call and it showed up 12 times. So this person called our house 12 times over a period of time. I didn't know when the first call was, but the last one came on Friday. I found another challenge from Brian and Nancy Cooter. This was probably their home number, and it showed up 4 times. The last time was a week ago. I wondered who Brian and Nancy were. I never heard Brenda mention their names. I wrote down their numbers and headed back upstairs. Damn, how difficult it was to climb the stairs on crutches. Soon my daughters returned from school and showered me with hugs and kisses. I was a happy father who had such wonderful and caring daughters. They said that they had homework, which they usually did immediately upon returning. Cheryl brought me a beer from the refrigerator, and Sue carefully lifted my leg and placed it on the ottoman. They kissed me again and went to their room to do their homework. There was a TV and a computer in their room, and I heard the music start playing. We had a secure internet filter so they couldn't get to adult sites. Plus, Brenda regularly checked their browsing history to make sure everything was in order. I knew Brenda would be home from work in an hour. I decided to call the number of her friend Joyce, who Brenda claimed she was meeting with on Saturday. Her son Mitchell answered the call. "Hello?" he said. "Hello, Mitch. This is Uncle Rob. How are you doing there?" I asked. He called us aunt and uncle out of respect since our families were very close. "Hello, Uncle Rob. How are you? Aunt Brenda called here yesterday and told Mom everything about your accident. Are you okay?" "I have a couple of bruises and a sprained ankle, but I can handle it," I chuckled. "Uncle Rob, Mom and Dad are not at home right now. Do you want them to call back?" "No, I just called to let you know that everything is fine with me." "I didn't know Brenda called yesterday," I replied. "We found out about this on Saturday, Uncle Rob. My dad and I were watching the news, and they were talking about the incident, but they didn't name the minors until their families were notified. Dad and I saw Cheryl and Sue on the screen. We realized it had to be you." "So you guessed it was me?" I asked. "Yes, when Mom came home, we showed her Cheryl and Sue in the background. She covered her face with her hands, became emotional, and began to cry." "Was Mom home, Mitch? What time was it?" I asked. "I think about 11:30. It was right after the sports block. Then they started talking about the mine again. We didn't go to bed for a long time, but we said that there would be no news for several more hours. Dad and I ended up laying down, but we prayed for you, Uncle Rob. Mom stayed and called on the phone, I don't know who. She woke up my dad and me at 6 in the morning and said that you were fine, but you were in the hospital. Thanks for the prayers, Mitch. I'm sure they helped. Just tell your parents I called to let you know everything was fine. When I hung up the phone, my stomach began to churn again. If Joyce was home at 11:30, then who was Brenda with? When Brenda came home, she said I looked bad. I replied that I didn't feel very well either. She suggested calling the doctor, but I said that the reason was not the bruises or the dislocation, but the questions that were tormenting me from the inside. She said she didn't know what I was talking about. I said I needed to talk to her in private so the girls wouldn't hear. It was a very personal conversation. Brenda looked nervous. She got up and went to the girls. They decided to go to their girlfriends for a while so that Brenda and I could talk. When they left, Brenda asked, "Okay, Rob, what's this conversation? Because I wasn't at the mine. I told you that I was with my friends, and as soon as I found out about the incident, I immediately went to the hospital, but they didn't let me in. So what are the questions? Let's start with your panties. I saw how you dressed on Saturday. You were wearing a black set." She looked at me, slightly confused. "Have you decided to dig through my panties? What's wrong with you? Do you think I cheated on you? You know I would never do that." She really looked worried. "Those damn panties are in the drawer, in case you were wondering. I saw them there. That's what alarmed me. You washed them. When did you do this? What's wrong with you, Rob? Are you blaming me for washing my clothes? What came over you? If you must know, I did my laundry on Sunday. No, I didn't wash it. The cart is full. Even your bra from this set is still there. I think you washed your panties because they had stains on them. Call Joyce. She's my best friend. Call her and ask. I'm sick of these accusations, Rob. I'm sorry I wasn't there when they pulled you out, but I didn't cheat on you. We were just up late, that's all. I dropped Joyce off and saw the note when I got home and went straight to the hospital. I called Joyce. She wasn't home, so I talked to Mitch. He said he and his dad were watching the news and saw Cheryl and Sue on TV. They showed them to Joyce when she got home around 11:30. Is Mitch lying? I saw tears begin to appear in the corners of her eyes. Please, Rob, leave it alone. You are on the mend, and we are together again. Isn't that the main thing? So, you still cheated on me. With whom? Do I know him? How long has this been going on? You were even going to convince Joyce to lie for you. How low can you go? Brenda was crying now. It was a mistake, Rob. I didn't understand what was happening. I was flirting, and it turned out like I was back in college. I'm sorry, Rob. This only happened once. Please forgive me and leave this behind. I swear this will never happen again. Please, Rob, if not for me, then for the sake of the girls and our family. At that moment, I was torn apart, but I tried to hold on. Can I forgive her? After all, she was my life. I thought if this was an isolated incident, maybe, but if she had done this before, our marriage would be doomed. I needed to know more. Rob, say something. Please say something, Brenda asked. What's his name? I asked. That bastard's name. Please, Rob, forget about it. I swear this won't happen again. Nothing good can come from dragging other people into this. I was guilty, and now I am being punished. I looked at her face, frightened and full of despair, and finally asked the question that had been haunting me for several days. Who is Brian Cooter? I asked. Brenda's face turned pale, and she stood there with her mouth open, at a loss for words. It seemed that I had hit the nail on the head. Where? Who? How? Oh God, she was already starting to cry. Are you going to tell me about this friend Brian, or should I call him personally? I have his cell number and the home phone number he shares with his wife Nancy. Where should I call? Please, Rob, it's already over. Don't drag his family into this. I dated him for a few months, but last Saturday I ended things with him. It's really over, Rob. She began to tell how it all started. It turned out that he was an old acquaintance of hers from college and now worked as a sales representative for the company where she worked. He lived in the next town, only 25 miles away. She begged me to forgive her and made God knows how many promises. I said that I needed time to think about everything, and that for now I would sleep in the guest room. I didn't want to see her or talk to her. I was still on crutches, and it was difficult for me to move, but I knew that the most important thing now was time and distance to think things through. When the girls returned home, they saw their mother crying and came to talk to me. I told them that their mother and I had had a serious fight and that we might be going to separate. This caused them great pain. They kept asking me, why? I replied that it was their mother's responsibility to explain, but I said, your mother broke her wedding vows. I may not have mentioned this, but I have always been a quiet person, used to keeping things to myself. Over the next week, Brenda went to work and returned home, trying to act as normal, but nothing worked. My sister Betty came to see me, and I told her the whole story. She started crying and asked me what I was going to do. I explained that I loved Brenda, but that I could never trust her again, and that I was going to file for divorce. One day Joyce came to talk to me. She tried to talk about how much Brenda felt about her mistakes, and that she really did end things with Rob. I, in turn, explained to Joyce that if this had been an isolated incident, I might have been able to survive it, but I knew that this had been going on for months. Joyce burst into tears. I told her it was a terrible mistake, but she didn't listen to me, Joyce said. She just wanted to feel like she was in college again. God, I'm so sorry, Rob. You and Brenda were a great couple. I know Brenda loves you more than anything. She just made some stupid mistakes. Please try to forgive her, Joyce asked through tears. And you know, on the day of your accident, she really was going to break up with Brian. I immediately called her as soon as I heard about the accident, but her phone was turned off. Once my leg healed enough for me to walk, I moved. I stayed with my sister Betty for a week while I looked for an apartment closer to home. I wanted to be close to my daughters, who were completely innocent in this unpleasant situation. Brenda and the girls were crying. They asked if I was going away for a while to think things over. I explained to my daughters that I filed for divorce due to irreconcilable differences. It was expected to be completed in about 4 months. I saw no reason why I could change my mind. The girls were teenagers, and Brenda actually told them about her affair and admitted her mistake. The girls loved their mother, but they really hated what she did. They only spoke to her out of necessity for several months. I was able to rent a 2-bedroom apartment so the girls could stay with me if they wanted. I returned to work, but decided to work the day shift and move to a quarry rather than a deep mine. I was glad to get back to work. It really helped fill the void in my life. After work, I often spent time with friends and always saw my daughters regularly. A week before the divorce was finalized, Brenda came to my apartment in the evening. We haven't spoken much since I left home. I let her in. I loved her, but at the same time I hated her. Rob, I have to make one last try. I really love you, and I know we can get through this. I promise to be the best wife in the world. Please think again and try to give us another chance. Brenda, I love you. There will probably always be a place in my heart for you, but I can never, ever trust you again. This is impossible. You deceived me and lied to me again and again. I was scared, and it really ended. I just wanted to survive. Brenda, you said you weren't having an affair. Then, when you were caught, you said it was only one time. Now I know this went on for months. Like I said, I can never trust you again, and I'm not going to make my life hell by constantly doubting your honesty. Sorry, but that's how it is. Brenda stood up and walked out crying. Tears welled up in my eyes, too. I really loved her, and 17 years of marriage were lost. Brenda tells her story. I need to admit to everyone how stupid I was. I had a wonderful man whom I truly loved. However, I still love him, although I know that I will never be with him again. 9 years have passed since we got divorced. It all happened because I suddenly felt like I could go back in time and relive a couple of moments from my college life. How stupid I was. To begin with, I must tell you that I was an ordinary teenager. My parents were quite strict and watched me closely. When I finally graduated from school, I decided that I would live that same turbulent life that I had seen so often in films. To be honest, I thought it was fun at the time. The only problem is that sooner or later we have to pay for some mistakes and experiences in our lives. I've been paying for mine for 9 years now. I lost the only man I've ever loved. But life goes on, and I try to cope. I have 2 wonderful daughters who are already married and 3 grandchildren whom I adore. Returning to my life in college, it is worth saying that it was there that I began to lead a promiscuous lifestyle. I started actively attending parties. I studied well and was smart enough that I didn't have to spend much time studying. I always had good grades, so there were no problems academically. I didn't drink that much, and there was no need for it. I just decided that I could say goodbye to morality. I want to live freely. I lost my virginity at the first party I went to. The partner turned out to be one of the senior students named Brian Cooter. He was a football player and looked quite attractive. We started dancing, he started kissing me and put his hands on my hips. I let him do it. There was sex going on all around us, but I wasn't ready to get naked in front of everyone yet, so Brian took me into one of the rooms. He quickly took off my jeans and underwear. When I said that this was my first time, he was surprised and promised to be careful. He laid me on the bed and entered me. I felt a slight burning sensation, and then strong emotions overtook me. Now I have become a woman. I was on the pill, but I also always insisted that my partners use condoms. I didn't want to risk my health, but I liked the sex. The first time was not bad, but I expected something more. Yes, I reached orgasm, and Brian was proud of himself, as if it were his personal achievement. I still don't understand what men see in this. Then we returned downstairs to the others and continued talking. I thought that was it, but parties became a regular thing for me, and I started going to them almost every week. I dated Brian for about 3 weeks and then moved on to other guys. Sex with Brian wasn't anything special. I don't even want to remember how many partners I had in the end. Honestly, I tried a lot, including sex with several guys at the same time, and even was with several girls. I just wanted to try everything. One day I drank more than usual, and a guy took advantage of it. He tried a different kind of sex with me, and I hated it. It hurt too much, and I didn't like it at all. The only man who later touched me in this way was my husband, Rob. He was very gentle, used a special gel, and was extremely attentive, so although it wasn't my favorite, he was at least tolerable. Maybe it was because of the love I felt for him. I can say with confidence that I didn't love anyone I was with before him as much as I loved Rob. When I met him, one of his friends told me it was Rob's birthday. We danced, and I immediately liked him. I don't know why I did this, but I took his hand and led him upstairs, where we made love. With him, everything was completely different, not like with everyone else. He seemed to think more about me than himself. With him, everything happened for real, as between people who love each other, and not just looking for fleeting pleasure. I had never experienced anything like this before. With everyone else, it was just sex, we did it, and went our separate ways. With Rob, it was different. I was a little disappointed when I didn't see him at the next parties. I met his friend Jerry, and he told me that Rob works as a miner and often doesn't have time to party. I was glad when Rob showed up again a month later. I don't remember who I was with at that moment, but I remember that I happily left that guy to be with Rob. After that, we started dating when I returned to my hometown. When I rented my own apartment, Rob began to come to me at least twice a week, and we made love. With him, I really felt that this was love and not just intimacy. I realized that I was falling deeply in love. As soon as we started dating, I stopped talking to other guys. I had many opportunities to cheat on him, but I didn't want anyone but Rob. I knew he was worried about my past, but I always thought I was just finding myself and enjoying life. I was confident that with the right man I could settle down, and Rob became that man for me. We got married, and a few years later our daughters were born. They made our family complete. We did everything together, and it seemed like we had the perfect life. I admit that sometimes I had thoughts about other men. I might flirt a little, as many women do, but I didn't go overboard. I didn't cheat on Rob. That was until our daughters entered high school and I returned to work in an office. Rob worked long hours, and we rarely spent time together. Over time, I got bored and started going out on Saturdays with my best friends when Rob was at work. We would go to the movies or sometimes go to a bar and have a couple of cocktails. Sometimes we were asked to dance, and we agreed just for fun. That was until Brian Cooter came along. Brian, as I mentioned, was my first partner. Now he works as a sales representative for our company and comes to our city twice a month. We started joking with each other and reminiscing about old times. I couldn't help but admit that these conversations about the past made me feel certain. Brian asked me out to dinner a couple of times, but I declined, saying I was happily married. Besides, he was married. He just laughed and said that maybe someday we'll have a chance to be nostalgic. Well, this chance came. He found out that the girls and I were planning to spend the evening outside the house and came to our bar. We all danced together, and when my friend Joyce said she had to go home, we started getting ready since she was our driver. Brian asked me to stay and have another drink with him, promising to take me home. I don't know why I agreed. Sally looked at me strangely, but didn't say anything. We had been friends for years, and she knew I had never cheated on Rob before. After she left, Brian ordered another drink, and I know I drank too much. We danced, and he said it was like old times and put his hands on my hips again. God, why didn't I stop then? Stop it right away. But one thing led to another, and we kissed. After we left the bar, Brian continued kissing me outside his car, and we ended up in his motel room. It was completely wrong, but it was like everything went back to the old days, and we slept together. I wanted it, I let it happen. He said that he felt much better without a condom and allowed himself everything he wanted. Only when it was all over did I realize what I had done. I cheated on Rob. After Brian dropped me off at home, I cried all night. I thought I was better than this. The next day, Joyce asked me why I stayed at the bar with Brian. I lied and said he was just an old friend from college and that he took me home right away. I even lied to my best friend. Something told me that she guessed the truth, but she did not insist. Now I regret that she did not try to talk to me then. Maybe it would change everything. After that, Brian began periodically calling me at home, asking to meet again. I kept saying no and repeating that what happened was a mistake. I started avoiding him at work when he came to the office. I didn't know how to handle the situation. It was necessary to stop everything, but I just couldn't decide to do it. I probably liked the feeling that someone from the past still wanted me, that someone was interested in me. One day, our company hosted a retirement party for one of our vice presidents. I really wanted Rob to come with me, but he refused, saying he wasn't going to take a day off for someone he didn't even know. I was angry at him for this because we rarely argued, and I felt like I deserved his attention. The party was already in full swing, and I was hanging out with Joyce and Ellen when I suddenly saw Brian. This time, I cannot make the excuse that I was influenced by wine or some other weakness. As the event was ending, Brian approached me and started flirting again. This time I was angry with Rob, but at the same time I didn't think I'd go too far. Brian asked to just sit with him in his van and talk. We sat down, and he put his hand on my knee. Why didn't I remove it and leave then? Instead, I let him continue, and we had sex again. This time, everything happened in a van. There was no love at that moment, just an inexplicable closeness in which I felt some kind of strength, perhaps even danger. I returned home and again asked myself what was wrong with me. I had a good family and a loving husband, so why did I jeopardize that? Brian didn't back down and started calling me again, even at home, knowing that this could reveal everything. I was afraid that Rob would notice his number in the call log, so every evening I checked and erased all the entries on the phone. I told Brian again that this had to stop, that it was a mistake. We met one more time, and he said that if I came to him for the evening, he promised to leave me alone. This evening was another girls' meeting, and I told Joyce that I would come in my car. She knew what was going on and said that she would not cover for me because Rob was too good a person to be betrayed. I explained to her that I was going to break up with Brian and end it. Even though it was exciting, I didn't want to become the cheating wife. That evening, I kissed my daughters and Rob goodbye and went out to meet my friends. As expected, Brian came to our table. Joyce refused to sit next to him and later went home, refusing to wait for me. After she left, I went with Brian to his room for the last time, as I thought then. We did everything possible and even more. I let him go as far as I'd ever let anyone but Rob, hoping it would bring closure to our relationship. When it was all over, Brian said he wasn't going to leave me alone and wouldn't just let it go. I was shocked. He threatened to tell Rob if I didn't continue seeing him. At that moment, I realized what kind of person I had contacted. I screamed at him, demanding to leave me alone, and told him that if he hurt my family, I would tell his wife everything because I knew her phone number. Brian got angry and took a step towards me, but I hit him with my knee and left him on the floor, writhing in pain. He called me the most terrible words and said that I would return, but he was wrong. I realized that I had made the biggest mistake of my life and that I urgently needed to break this vicious circle. I prayed to God that I could get home before Rob found out about everything. When I arrived home, I saw a note on the refrigerator. "Mom, Dad had a mining accident. Please come as soon as possible." My breath caught in my throat, and I immediately turned on my answering machine, where I found several messages from Joyce. She tried to call me to tell me that Rob was in the hospital. I immediately took off my dress, put on jeans, and was just about to run out the door when I heard that the girls had returned home. They looked at me reproachfully, asking where I had been and why they couldn't find me. They said that Rob was fine, that he was in the hospital, but that his life was not in danger. I went to the hospital, but they said that they were not accepting visitors until the morning, since Rob was not in intensive care. The nurse reassured me, explaining that he was badly bruised and had a sprained ankle, but otherwise he would be fine. This was a great relief, but the feeling of guilt did not let me go. I went into the hospital chapel, said a prayer for Rob, and then sat for a long time, not holding back my tears. I realized that instead of being with my husband in a difficult moment, I was with a person whom I now despised. All the blame lay with me, not only with Brian, but also with me. I was the one who cheated on my husband, the one who betrayed the family. I, who taught my daughters to be honest, was unable to say no when it came to my own marriage. I made a promise to God that I would never betray Rob again. When I returned home, the girls were already asleep. I took a hot shower and changed into a nightgown. Then she noticed Brian's marks on her underpants and felt a wave of self-loathing. I immediately took them out of the laundry basket and washed them by hand, as if that could erase all the shame and pain I had brought upon our family. I couldn't sleep. I tried, but my thoughts were in complete disarray. After a couple of hours of lying in bed, I got up and got dressed to go to the hospital again. After talking to Rob, I was scared. I didn't know if I had the strength to hide the betrayal. I had no reasonable explanation for why I was not at the mine. I returned home and called Joyce, telling her everything that had happened with Brian, except the amount of sex. I explained that it was over and that I had punched and kicked Brian. I begged her to tell Rob that I was with her. I really felt embarrassed asking my best friend to lie for me. She said she'd think about it, but I had to end things with Brian. I thanked her and promised her that my cheating days were over. I put the panties back in the drawer and erased all the answering machine messages and call logs. I wanted to skip work on Monday to meet Rob, but he said his sister Betty was coming, and there was no point in me missing work. Monday was hard for me. I was told that Brian was not well and he went home in the morning. This meant that he would be gone for about a month. I thanked God for this. I didn't want to run into him so soon after Saturday's incident. You all know what happened next. Rob asked me questions about my panties and asked if I knew Nancy and Brian Cooter. I didn't understand where he got their names from. I tried to hide everything and told him to call Joyce. He said he called and spoke with her son Mitch. I admitted that it happened, but said that it was a one-time thing. I was completely confused, but he sat calmly and caught me in one lie after another. Finally, I confessed everything to him. I begged him for forgiveness, but he said he would move out by the end of the week. I had to explain to our daughters that I had cheated. I know I lost a lot of their respect that day, and although we have a good relationship with them now, I understand that they blame me for the breakup of the family. They're right. I have no one to blame but myself and my stupidity. After Rob moved out, I tried to talk to him several times. He wasn't going to change his mind about the divorce. How could I blame him? I love him so much, but I know there's nothing I can do to prove how much I'm sorry. A week before the divorce, I begged him for the last time. He said he loved me and would always have a place in his heart for me, but he could never trust me again, and he wasn't going to live in doubt about whether his wife was faithful to him. I left his apartment in tears, knowing that I had lost the most precious person in my life. After the divorce, I worked and spent almost all my time at home. We see Rob at family events, and we are always nice to each other. We both attended our daughters' weddings. It was strange, but nice to dance with him. He always asks if I'm okay and if I need help. Sometimes he even comes and fixes something in the house, but he never comes if I'm home alone. When our grandchildren were born, we were both close. He was a very happy grandfather. I cry every time I think about the stupidity that led to the collapse of our marriage. I had everything and I gave it away in one night. How stupid can a woman be? I went to consultations. I felt depressed, which was difficult to cope with. The doctors helped me. I also became closer to my daughters and grandchildren. I think my daughters see how sorry I am and have forgiven me a little. Perhaps this will keep them from making the same mistakes. I go on dates sometimes, and I have to admit that a lot of men are very nice, but none of them compare to Rob. I don't know if I can ever be serious about another man. If I get married again, I can guarantee that my husband will be the most faithful man. Rob's story continues. I found out that bastard Brian was still harassing Brenda. I still loved her, but I couldn't be married to her. It made me angry when Joyce called and said that this bastard was still stalking Brenda and she wanted nothing to do with him. I said I'll take care of it. You have to understand that after I left, I didn't talk to Brenda very often. I loved her too much and was afraid that I would return to her. I didn't want to be a cuckold husband who didn't trust his wife. I signed the divorce papers and left before she arrived with her lawyer. We made a decent deal. She stayed in the house, and of course, her daughters stayed with her. I had access to my daughters at any time. I saw them all the time, and after the divorce we kept in touch almost daily. I paid child support, but did not pay her maintenance. Brenda received a good salary. My children did not need anything. Overall, I probably spent too much on them. So, after signing the divorce papers, I was very angry and depressed. I decided to visit this scoundrel who was responsible for my divorce. Previously, I found out where he lives and found out what he drives and where he usually goes. I called home and his wife said he was at the main office and wouldn't be back until the next day. I thanked her and hung up. This meant that he was in my city. I found out what hotel he stayed at when he was in town and of course knew the bars and clubs in the area. He never met me in person, except at some parties when he was in the States. I went to the bar at the motel where he was staying. I noticed his car parked at the back of the building, next to the dumpsters. There was a back exit from the bar, and I thought that if he decided to leave with a woman, he could go out that way without being noticed. I ordered a beer and sat down at a table in the corner. There were a lot of people in the establishment. I was trying to guess if this Brian was one of them. I got lucky when a couple walked into the bar and I heard the bartender say, "Hello, Mr. Cooter, nice to see you again. What should I pour for you and the lady?" Here he is, and with another woman. They sat down at a table nearby. I noticed how he carried on the conversation, weaving in a slight flirtation, although the woman was wearing a wedding ring. I knew for sure that this was not his wife, because an hour ago she said that he had left for another city. Judging by the conversation, he seemed to be discussing work, but at the same time trying to hit on this married woman. I decided that tonight would not go well for him. After finishing my second beer, I left through the back exit. As I passed his car, I kicked it lightly to set off the alarm. I then hid next to a trash can where I found a nice wooden stick about 4 feet long. The alarm sounded for probably 5 minutes before Brian went out to check the car. He pressed the key fob button and the alarm went off. As he was about to go back inside, I hit him on the back with the board. He collapsed and I started kicking him again and again. I was wearing leather gloves and I bent down to give him a good beating. I finished off the beating by hitting him in the groin. Now he probably won't use this place for its intended purpose for a long time, if at all. I threw the board in the trash can and walked away to my truck. I didn't even know if he was alive or dead, and I didn't care. When I returned from work the next day, the phone kept ringing. I answered, and it was Brenda. "Rob, please tell me it wasn't you." "Brenda," I asked in bewilderment, "why are you calling me? What are you even talking about? What does 'was it me' mean? I don't understand what you mean. Are you okay? Do you need something?" She started saying, "Brian almost got killed yesterday. He's still unconscious, and they had surgery to keep him from losing. Well, you know." "What does this have to do with me? I hope this bastard dies a slow death. I have no sympathy for him. It's your damn lover, not mine." "Rob, he is not my lover. I don't like him either. I was just afraid that if you were involved, you might get in trouble. Believe me, I'm not worried about him." "So what happened? He seduced someone's wife, and the husband taught him a lesson that I didn't dare to learn." "Please, Rob, don't say that. All I know is that he was with Emmy, the new employee in the office. She was the one who found him. Apparently, she was helping him with reports, and he was planning to invite her to dinner. She said the alarm went off and Brian went out to check the car and never came back. She became nervous, and she and the bartender went out and found him. They said he was completely beaten and could barely breathe. Good for him. Glad he got what he deserved. Everyone always says it will happen, and it's nice to know that it actually happened. Look, Brenda, I don't know this guy, and I don't want to know him. It's nice to just know that he probably won't bother you anymore." "What? Rob? How do you know he was harassing me?" "Listen, as you said yourself, let's leave it at that. Just heard something. Well, I have things to do. If you need anything, let me know and say hi to the girls for me." I hung up before she could say anything else. A few days later, Joyce called me and told me that Brian had to have his manhood removed. It's a pity that he was still able to save something. I should have hit him again. When he was able to speak, he stated that he had been attacked by at least 2 people, beaten and robbed. He never saw their faces. He said that everything happened too quickly. When Joyce finished speaking, she said, "Thank you." When I asked why she was thanking me, there was a smile in her voice. She said, "You know?" I replied, "Please." She said again that Brenda had lost a good man. I didn't want to continue the conversation, so I just said goodbye. Life goes on. Over the past 9 years, I have stayed in touch with Brenda for the sake of our daughters. We were always polite to each other, and for some reason, we were always put together at family events. I attended all of my daughters' events from their graduations onwards. Of course, I attended both weddings and helped pay for them. Those were the only times I danced with Brenda, and I have to admit, it was nice. But I did not allow myself to be deceived. I was at the birth of all my grandchildren, sitting in the waiting room with Brenda. It's funny, but she almost never asked me for anything. Sometimes Cheryl or Sue would say that Mom told them about something that was broken in the house, such as a dripping tap or a faulty socket. I came and fixed it when Brenda wasn't home. She always called me the next day to thank me. It's funny that she never asked for the house key back. I understand that this is a rather strange relationship, but that's the way it is. We never kissed, went to dinner, or dated as a couple. I never came to her house if she was alone. I assumed that she was dating someone, but no one told me about it. Of course, she was now a single woman and had every right to live the way she wanted. She just spent most of her free time with her daughters and grandchildren. I always knew that she would be a good grandmother. As for me, I continued to work at the mine. My daughters said I was a good father, and I tried to be a good grandfather. I was always there for family events, birthdays, and holidays. I planned to attend school events when my grandchildren were older. I dated different women, but couldn't get my mind set on a serious relationship. Maybe it was because I got burned with Brenda, or maybe it was because I couldn't find a woman for whom I felt the same way as I did for my ex-wife. Sex with other women was good, but it did not equal the memories I had with my ex-wife. There were always people trying to set me up with someone. It seemed as if there weren't enough men in the world. Maybe they thought I was reliable and had a good job. Honestly, I don't know. The only people who didn't try to arrange my personal life were my daughters, my sister, and the friends I shared with Brenda. They probably thought Brenda and I would get back together someday. But there is little chance of this. 9 years have passed, and I firmly stood my ground. Lecture. We, my fellow miners, worked in the mines during the day and always stopped in for a couple of bottles of beer before going home. When we left, those damn students were still in the parking lot with their signs. I remember once saying that someone needs to explain to these protesters what coal actually does for them. We were sitting at the bar, drinking beer, and then Mike told me that after he sent his wife that funny email about what wives say, she sent him a response. By the way, Mike and his wife Raisin get along great. Honestly, I think they have always been faithful to each other. They constantly tease each other, but only jokingly. Mike took his email out of his pocket and read. He didn't like my casserole, and he didn't like my pie. He said my buns were a little hard, not like his mom's. I made the wrong coffee, he didn't like the stew. I didn't mend his socks like his mother did. I was looking for an answer, thinking about what to tell him. And then she turned and slapped him in the face, just like his mom did. After he read his wife's response, Mike pointed to his cheek and laughed, saying that's where she hit him. He and Raisin had the same kind of marriage that Brenda and I once had. I often remember happy times. At that moment, Matt Markley, one of the managers of our mine, approached us. He was a good guy and always talked to us honestly. He offered to buy another round of beer, and of course we agreed. He looked at me and said, "Rob, we heard you say today that someone needs to teach the protesters the basics of the coal industry. We've talked to the college and are sending a representative to talk to students about coal on Earth Day this year. We wish it were you." "Wow, Matt, I'm not a teacher. I'm a miner, and I'm proud of it," I answered. "Exactly, Rob. That's why we want you to do it. They will benefit from hearing about the mines from someone who works in them. These students do not need a boring lecturer who will explain something about our industry. Plus, you will have the opportunity to speak out. I think there will be no more than a dozen students in the room, so you can say whatever you think, within reason, of course." The guys supported Matt and said that I should agree. They started calling me teacher. For some reason, I agreed and told Matt I would take part. He said I have 2 days to prepare. "Damn it, Matt, that's not much at all," I muttered. "Just speak from the heart, Rob. You know mine better than anyone. If you need facts and figures, come into the office and get what you need," he encouraged me. Matt treated us to another round and thanked me for helping the company out. I returned home and began collecting materials for the presentation. I thought to myself that I'm not usually a wordy person, but when I start talking, sometimes I get myself into trouble. The next day, I went to the library to look for more information I needed to make convincing arguments and evidence about the role the coal industry plays in their daily lives. I learned that a few days earlier, a wood and forestry specialist had given a talk to the students. On the day of the speech, I came to the college and asked where the meeting would be held. One student looked at me strangely and pointed to the audience. Oh my God, I thought. Matt said only a dozen students would show up. The auditorium could hold hundreds of people, and it was already half full, with more students still arriving. A nice woman approached me, introduced herself as Miss Angela Smiley, and explained that I would be the last speaker for Earth Day week. She assured that if any of the students began to row, he would be immediately expelled from the college. Miss Smiley gave some introductory remarks about Earth Day, explaining its meaning, when it was established, and so on. Then she introduced me, calling me Robert Mathias from the coal industry. I was overcome with horror. If Matt were here, I would strangle him. Occasional claps were heard from the hall as I approached the podium. I told about myself and said that I had been working at the mine for more than 30 years. Said I was proud of what the coal industry had done for America. One student shouted something about destroying the earth. I replied that I would touch on this topic as well. I decided to give them a little history lesson. He started talking about the use of coal. I used facts from the library and made some transparent slides that could be projected onto the board behind me. I started my speech. Approximately 30% of all fossil fuels consumed in the United States are used to generate electricity. In contrast, most electricity, about 70%, is generated in the United States using fossil fuels, especially coal. Typically, coal from one or more mines is transported by rail or barge to a thermal power plant. Turbine generators use steam to generate high-voltage electricity. This electricity is converted to higher voltage for transmission through the power grid to industrial, commercial, and residential consumers. Close to the users, it is converted again, this time to low voltage, and distributed through the familiar distribution system of poles and overhead wires. I immediately knew they wanted to know more about how coal was destroying the environment. I first explained why we burn and use coal. Most of the coal mined in the United States is burned to generate electricity. Every year, about 1 billion tons are spent on electricity production. Most people don't even realize that when they use electricity, they are most likely also using coal. Of the coal that is not used to generate electricity, most is used to produce steam for heating, as coke for steelmaking, or for export. In developing countries, half the world's population depends on coal for heating. I'll explain it in simple language to make it clearer. We, the people, that's me, and you are the ones who consume coal. Do you want an iPod, a Wii console? Do you watch TV? And the computer, does anyone here have a computer? What do you listen to and watch on your CDs and DVDs? As I said, every time you use electricity, you use coal because that's the fuel that the power companies get. Do you want to stop coal mining? Then get rid of everything that runs on electricity. Tell your local hospital they don't need all this equipment to save lives. And the city? Tell them they don't need lights to keep you safe at night. See how coal has improved your life and the lives of your families over the centuries. I can go on and on about what the coal industry means to the world, but I think you get the idea. When I finished, one of the students stood up and said, "You are telling the truth, but look what you've done to the earth." I'll be honest with you. Yes, many years ago the earth was deprived of many resources and the land remained neglected. Today we have programs that require mining companies to restore sites so they look as good or better than before. I showed several slides showing how the mining industry has restored many of the sites. As the pictures flashed on the screen behind me, I read excerpts from an article on mining I found in the library, highlighting only the most important points. Reclamation is the process of systematically restoring mined land to productive use, a kind of landscape plastic surgery that transforms former coal mines into productive, attractive, and useful areas. Until 1947, when Ohio's first surface mining law was passed, surface mining was unregulated. In 1949, the Office of Reclamation was created and charged with enforcing new reclamation laws. However, the surface mining law was changed many times and in 1972 became one of the strictest laws in the country for regulating ongoing mining. Before a company can begin surface mining, it must specify how topsoil, water conditions, vegetation, wildlife, and archaeological resources will be protected, and describe how the land will be mined and reclaimed. The coal company must also post a bond of $2,500 per acre to ensure successful reclamation of the land. Additionally, for every ton of coal mined, Ohio operators pay federal and state taxes that are used to reclaim abandoned mines. The federal tax is 35 cents per ton of coal mined at the surface and 15 cents per ton of coal mined from the mine. The state tax is 9 cents per ton. Brownfield land reclamation can cost $10,000 per acre, while land reclamation alongside mining costs between $1,000 and $3,000 per acre. The modern coal mine operator must comply with many regulations. However, despite increasing regulatory requirements and the costs of carrying out acceptable reclamation, many coal mine operators are proving that business can be profitable while restoring mined land to a useful and productive location. I told the student that since I've been working in the mines, the company I work for has planted over 500,000 trees, so future generations will have the same, if not better, land to live on. In summary, I told them that they control their future. If they feel that too much coal is being mined, they and their friends and families can stop using any electrical appliances. Then there will be no need to mine coal if it is not used. I ended by saying that I realized that much of what was said would fall on deaf ears, but at least now they knew that they were responsible for the use of any coal they mined. When I finished, I was applauded. I looked to the side and saw Matt clapping too. He must have come in while I was talking. At least I had the opportunity to voice my opinion. Several students came up to me after the lecture and thanked me for the lesson. For some reason, they had never connected the coal industry with electricity before. One woman came up to me and thanked me. She said that her father was also a miner, but retired about 10 years ago. Her name was Mary, and she looked to be in her late 30s or early 40s. She asked if I would mind if she invited me to lunch to discuss the topic of mining. It was lunchtime, and I agreed. We went to a small restaurant in the city and started talking. We hardly talked about mining. I learned that she was recently divorced and has 2 grown children. I was very wrong about her age. She said she was 49, but she looked much younger. After her divorce, she decided to return to college and study secretarial science. When she heard that someone was coming to talk about coal mining, she became interested since her father was a miner. She was a very pleasant woman and easily found a common language. I told her that I myself had been divorced for 9 years and shared a little experience of working both in deep mines and in quarries. I didn't say anything about the reason for my divorce from Brenda. After the conversation, Mary asked if it would be okay for me to call her sometime and meet again. As we said goodbye, I paid for lunch and gave her a ride to the car. I was still that man who considered paying for dinner to be respectful of a woman. Some people call it chauvinism, but I call it respect. I took her phone number and thought about seeing her again. We had a lot in common. We were both divorced, we had 2 grown children each, and she understood what miners went through, as her father worked in the industry. The next day, when I returned to work, of course, they started teasing me. I've been called everything from Teacher Rob to Dr. Rob. I was called into the office and was thanked for presenting our industry in a positive light. After the meeting, Matt informed me that we had a small explosive event planned in 3 days. This was symbolic because that day was Earth Day, and journalists and television crews would be on site to document the explosion and subsequent restoration of the site. The plan was to place charges on one of the mined-out shafts to collapse it, eliminating the risk of someone in the future accidentally falling into the mine voids or wells that are sometimes left behind after mining. You can't imagine how many such voids and wells we find during our work. After the explosion, we had to level the surface and start planting trees. I was one of the senior members of the blasting crew and would be the first to set the charges that day. We were going to wait until late in the evening to do the explosion because we wanted good lighting for the TV shoot. That evening, I decided to call Mary and invite her to dinner. We talked and ended up going dancing. We had a couple of cocktails, but didn't go overboard. I told her about the planned explosion, and she admitted that it always bothered her when her father went down the mine. I realized that, despite her understanding of my work, being with a miner would be difficult for her. Right now, she just needed a friend. While dancing, she put her arm around my neck. pulled me towards her, and kissed me. It was nice, and I answered her in kind. When we returned to the table, she looked at me and asked if being intimate with her would be a problem for me. I asked her if she was sure she wanted this. She smiled and said, yes. We went to a motel outside the city where no one knew us. She said she just needed to feel loved. Her ex-husband cheated on her with a younger girl, and she admitted that it left her feeling old. I explained to her that she was far from old and very attractive. I left only the corner lamp on for a soft light as she prepared to take off her clothes. I asked to be allowed to do this. Slowly unbuttoning her blouse and kissing her neck, I pulled the blouse off her shoulders. Even though I barely knew her, I was going to treat her like I was crazy about her. Kissing her neck, I unclasped her bra. Her breasts were beautiful, and I leaned down to touch them with my lips. She was wearing only jeans and underwear. I unbuttoned and slid the jeans down her thighs, letting them fall to the floor. She was a plump woman, but far from plump, she looked attractive and seductive. I approached her on my knees, carefully removed her underwear, and invited her to lie on the bed. She followed my request, and I gave her all the tender experience she deserved. After it was over, she smiled at me, and I realized that this meeting meant a lot to both her and me. In the morning, after breakfast, we talked frankly. She revealed that her real name was Mary Nancy Cooter. Her ex-husband was the person who destroyed my marriage. When she found out that I was a minor, she realized that this was the same man who suffered from her husband's infidelity and decided to meet with me. Mary continued to talk, looking into my eyes, and I felt that this conversation was not easy for her. Most of what I told you is true, she said. After I found out that my husband was cheating on me, and it was probably because of this that he ultimately lost his health, I filed for divorce. He turned out to be a lousy husband and not the best father. I raised my children almost alone, although he paid child support and child rearing assistance. When the children reached adulthood, the help stopped, but I still managed. She paused and continued. At work, I was offered a higher position with an increase in salary if I received a diploma, so I went to study. I will soon receive my degree, and this will bring a long-awaited promotion. I heard that a coal miner was going to speak at the university, and when I found out your name, I remembered that my husband mentioned it in his stories. I put two and two together and realized that you are the same man whose marriage collapsed because of him. And to be honest, at first I came to the lecture out of curiosity. I looked at her in confusion, trying to understand her motives, but Mary continued to speak with sincerity in her voice. After I heard your speech, she said, I became interested in what kind of person you are, how honest and dedicated you are to your work. I realized that you are a good person. And then, probably, it was a mixture of curiosity and a desire to understand what kind of person you are, who is so sincere about your profession, I invited you to dinner. And then, she sighed, as much as it sounds, I guess I just wanted a little revenge and some comfort at the same time. She fell silent and looked at me with a slight smile. I have to tell you, Rob, that your wife is a fool for choosing someone like my ex. I've never felt like such a woman as I do with you. She lowered her eyes a little embarrassedly. You really love her, because you called me Brenda twice during our intimacy. You know, whatever it was, what you and I had was not just physical, it was something more, and I think it was like real intimacy, which is much more than just sex. I was stunned and didn't know what to say. Mary turned out to be much deeper and more sensitive than I thought. Mary, I finally said, I'm sorry I called you by a different name. It's probably just because you remind me of her, and maybe that's also the reason why I felt so close to you. Perhaps, she nodded with a knowing smile. But believe me, your ex-husband is just a womanizer, and you are a real person, a person capable of love. I wouldn't cheat on you if you were my husband. Know that you can always call me if you need a friend, or someone to just talk to or hang out with. She waved goodbye to me and walked away, leaving me with my thoughts. After meeting Mary, all I could say was that her ex-husband was a real idiot for cheating on such a woman. And again, thoughts about Brenda returned, surprisingly, 9 years later. Later, I went to visit my daughters and grandchildren. First, I went to see Cheryl and then to Sue. I told them about the upcoming explosion, which was supposed to take place the next day. Of course, they asked me to be careful. I explained to them that I had done this many times and that I would be extremely careful. I wanted to ask how things were going with their mother, but decided not to bring up the topic. Monday morning came and I went to work. Me, Mike, and Joe were at the site to set the explosives. It's funny, but when we arrived, there were only 3 protesters. And this is on Earth Day, whereas a week ago, there were 24 people near us. Perhaps my lecture was beneficial. These 3 seemed to just come to observe. In a few hours, hundreds of people will likely gather to watch when the explosion begins. We installed chain-link fencing and posted a dozen warning signs to keep anyone from getting too close. We didn't want to risk anyone's safety. It was a complex operation, and I was lowered into several shafts to place the charges. It is incredible how many underground mines were located under this quarry. The place was extremely dangerous, and that is why it had to be brought down so that no one would accidentally be trapped if the ground subsides in the future. By lunchtime, we finished setting up the charges and went to have a snack. We locked the area and went to the dining room. We had about 4 hours left before the explosion, and cameras were waiting for us, ready to capture the moment. People love these kinds of spectacles, and we wanted to show how much we care about restoring the land by making sure that trees are leveled and planted. As we sat in the dining room, we heard a woman screaming for help. A woman ran up to our tent, shouting that her friends had fallen into a hole. We had a hard time understanding what she was saying and asked her to calm down so she could explain everything more clearly. It turned out that this was the same student who was picketing with 2 friends. She reported that after we left the explosive site, her friends climbed over the fence to take a closer look at the site. She heard their screams as they disappeared from view and thought they might have fallen into one of the shafts. Me, Mike, and Joe jumped up and got into the 6-wheeler with the girl and asked her to show us the place where she saw her friends disappear. This was the very area we were going to collapse. I got out of the rover and slowly walked towards the place where she said they fell. The ground in this place was very soft, and I carefully crawled to the edge. "What are their names?" I asked the girl. "Their names are Jason and Brad," she answered, trembling with excitement. I called out, "Jason, Brad, can you hear me?" A few seconds later, a weak voice was heard. "Help me, get us out of here. We are stuck in this hole and cannot get out." "Calm down," I said. "We are here to help you, but it will take a little time." "Are you Jason or Brad?" "I'm Jason. Brad doesn't move. I think he might be dead." "Quiet, Jason. You're panicking. You need to calm down. Can you check if he has a pulse? Try feeling it on your neck or wrist. Will you do this for me?" "Yes, I feel a pulse, but it doesn't move." "Okay, so he's just unconscious." "He'll be fine," I said, although I wasn't sure about it myself, but I couldn't let Jason panic anymore. I sent Mike and Joe to get a crane and asked them to escort the girl to security until the police arrived. We needed to understand exactly how everything happened. I told Jason that I would have to wait for my colleagues to return with the lifting equipment, but that I would stay here and talk to him so that he would not feel alone. With a flashlight in hand, I illuminated the hole and saw 2 guys below. Even though they were college students, they acted like children. Clearly, they lacked common sense. We later found out that both of us had been drinking all night and continued drinking in the morning. They decided to show their courage and check how close they could get to the explosion site. The girl tried to stop them, but they did not listen to her. Perhaps their state of intoxication saved them from falling, since their bodies were relaxed. I asked Jason if he felt any damage or bleeding. He replied that it seemed not, but his whole body was numb. Suddenly, I heard Jason say, "Crap, what happened, Jason? Everything is fine?" I asked worriedly. I peed myself," he answered, embarrassed. "Please get me out of here." "There's not much left, Jason. Try to stay calm." Mike and Joe returned with the crane. Joe stopped the crane 30 yards from the pit because it was too dangerous to get any closer. He slowly lowered the crane boom towards me, and I put on the safety harness, preparing to descend. There was little space in the pit, and I realized that I would have to attach the rescue belts to both guys myself. Before the descent, Mike helped me put on my headphones to communicate with Joe, who was operating the crane. I put on my helmet, took an additional helmet and another harness, and they carefully began to lower me down. While I was descending, I examined the walls of the pit. The two beams looked extremely precarious, and I was afraid that they might collapse at any moment. I decided to pull Jason out first, since he was panicking and would interfere with my work with Brad. I put a helmet and harness on him and told him to stay still while they lifted him up. I also warned him not to touch the walls of the pit so as not to accidentally cause a collapse. I gave Joe the command to pick up Jason. A few minutes later, Jason was safely upstairs. Joe informed me that there was a large crowd of people gathered around the fence. Television stations had already arrived and were filming what was happening. Mike said that he examined Jason. He was slightly beaten up from the fall, but otherwise healthy, although still drunk. Mike added with a grin that he did much more than just wet himself, causing me to involuntarily grin. With Brad, the situation turned out to be more complicated. Because he was unconscious, I had no way of knowing whether he had any injuries to his neck or internal organs. Lifting him with a regular rescue harness was too risky and could have killed him. I advised Mike and Joe to use a rescue basket instead of a harness. At the mine, we had these baskets for emergencies, and although it would take longer, it was safer to do it that way. Joe lowered the basket. When I received it, I carefully rolled Brad, who was unconscious, into it. I tried to strap him in as tightly as possible so that he couldn't move. I thought he was just drunk, but I couldn't risk it. He didn't look like he had anything broken. I told Joe to start picking it up. While they were lifting him, he began to come to his senses and kick. He did not understand where he was and what was happening to him. I screamed at him to stop kicking, but he was drunk and scared. He moved too actively, and the stretcher touched one of the loosely fastened beams, and it collapsed. I screamed as she hit the bottom of my leg. "Ah!" "Rob, are you okay?" Joe and Mike shouted. "No, it's not okay. The stretcher knocked over a beam, and it looks like it broke my leg. The pain will come soon. Get this guy." "Mike, I'm sorry, but you're going to have to come down and get that beam off of me. I can't move it." Chapter 6, Conclusion. I saw Mike come down with a separate chain to wrap around the beam. He secured it and told Joe to lift it very slowly as the beam was resting on my leg and my leg was broken. We watched as the beam rose and disappeared from sight. As soon as she was lifted, I felt a burning pain in my leg. The stretcher lowered again. Mike helped me get settled into them. After he secured me in the basket, he told Joe that he would go up with me to control the movement of the basket. Joe pulled us both out at the same time. We didn't usually do this, but Mike wanted to get me out as quickly as possible and keep the basket away from the other beams. When we got out, paramedics were already waiting for us. A crowd of people gathered around to greet Mike and me. I felt a throbbing pain in the lower part of my leg. I looked at the crowd of cheering spectators and saw my two daughters, and behind them their mother, standing and crying. Once the paramedics stabilized my leg for the ride to the hospital, my family approached me. I looked at Brenda, who was crying. She said, "I may not have been there for you last time, but I am here now." She even kissed me before they took me to the hospital. The paramedics gave me painkillers, and I passed out. It was already late in the evening when I began to remember something. I knew from the hospital staff that my daughters and Brenda had been there all day. I didn't know how to feel about it or what to think. Brenda entered as soon as she was allowed. I asked her about the two guys, and she said they both got away with some bruises, but were otherwise fine. These were two drunk students who apparently lacked common sense. She turned the TV on to the news channel and said they had been showing it all day. I saw a recording of the guys being pulled out, and then Mike and me. The news called me a hero for saving the students, and Mike was called a hero for coming down to get me. I looked at Brenda, and she still had tears in her eyes. Visitors started coming in, and she came out for a few minutes. Mike and Joe came by too and said they had finished the demolition after I was taken to the hospital. Bulldozers and graders were already leveling the area. Tomorrow we were supposed to start planting trees. They said that due to the accident, people are still at the construction site and looking at the site. I thanked both of them for saving me. They said it was just part of the job and laughed. These were true friends that I had known all my life. Mike looked at me. I knew he wanted to say something. Spit it out, Mike. What do you have to say? Brenda has been here since she found out you were in the hole. I never interfered in your affairs, but I have to tell you that this woman loves you. That's all I wanted to say. Anyone else would have made me angry, but I knew Mike too well. He was always someone I completely respected. I thanked them for their visit, and they said they would come by. According to the doctors, I will be out of work for several months. I had no idea how long it would last, but I wasn't particularly excited about keeping my leg in the air. Cheryl and Sue came in next. They kissed and hugged me and told me everything would be okay. They worked on a plan, and all I had to do was get better. I thanked them, although to be honest, I didn't understand what they were talking about. My sister Betty and her husband also visited me, and we talked about my new hero status. This was already starting to confuse me. Visiting hours were almost over and Brenda entered the room again. I looked at her as she sat down in a chair, placed an ottoman next to her, and covered her legs with a small blanket. Brenda, visiting hours are over. What are you doing? She smiled at me. I talked to the doctor, and he allowed me to stay here for the night. I told him that I am your wife and showed him that we have the same last name. Why don't you go home to your big comfy bed instead of sleeping in a chair? Because you're here, if that's what you need to know. Now try to sleep. You'll probably have a lot of visitors tomorrow. I didn't argue or say anything. I just closed my eyes and fell asleep. I thought I heard the words, "I love you," before falling asleep. When I woke up the next morning, I saw Brenda smiling with a cup of coffee. "Good morning, Sonia," she said. "How are you feeling? Do you need anything?" "Your coffee smells so good," I replied. "My leg hurts and is almost numb. I can't turn or position myself differently, but I guess I'll have to live with it for a while." I noticed that I was talking to her like an old friend. It must have been the drugs, I thought. She went and bought me a cup of coffee and a straw. She said that in my situation, I would definitely spill it all on myself. She even added a couple of ice cubes so I wouldn't burn my mouth. I asked her about her job, and she said that after learning about my injury, she left work yesterday and told her boss that she would take a couple of days off. We were talking about the accident when they brought me breakfast. The nurse lifted me into a sitting position so I could eat. She also lowered my leg a little. It hit my nerves painfully, and I had to restrain myself not to scream. Soon after breakfast, the doctor came in and explained my condition. He said that I would have to stay in the hospital for about a week to make sure that the healing was going well, and that I would have to keep my leg suspended. The doctor also advised that the leg would remain in a cast or similar cast for 2 to 3 months, during which time I would have to stay away from any pressure on it. Then I will have physical therapy to regain my strength. He installed 2 pins in his leg. "Doctor, what about work, and how can I manage my basic needs?" I asked. "As for work, you will have to put it off for 5 to 6 months, depending on the speed of recovery. And for the toilet, you have a special bottle. As for other needs, this is one of the reasons why you will be here for a week. You will need help. When you get home, you can use a bottle for relief and walk to the toilet on crutches if you have something like a porta potty like we have here." I noticed a slight smirk on Brenda's face. She knew that I was the kind of guy who tried to do everything himself, and she understood that in such a situation I would have to come to terms with the need for help. To be honest, I was worried. As I sat there, I was thinking about my difficult domestic situation when Cheryl and Sue walked in. "Hi, Dad," they both said. Then Cheryl started asking questions about how I was feeling. They, as always, did not forget to hug and kiss me. Brenda told the girls that while they were here, she would go home, take a shower, and get cleaned up. She said she would be back in a couple of hours. Rob, remember to be good and obey. If you need anything, I'm sure Cheryl and Sue will help you. She squeezed my hand, smiled, and left. For some reason, it seemed to me that she would lean over and kiss me. I didn't understand what my problem was. The girls looked at me, and Sue noticed that I looked puzzled. Yes, these girls were as smart as their mother. "What's the matter, Dad? Maybe we can help. That's what we're here for," Cheryl said. "Well, if you want to know. The doctor said that I'll have to stay here for about a week, and then I'll probably be bedridden for a few weeks and have to walk on crutches for a few months. I'm just not sure how I'll cope with it. Deal with it." "Dad," Sue began, "we told you yesterday not to worry because we will take care of everything. Are you even listening to us?" She smiled. "Yes, I remember you saying that, but I had no idea what you were talking about. Are you hiring a nurse or someone to help me? I'm honestly not sure I can do this alone." "Dad, you're moving back in with Mom," Sue said. "What? No, really. You know how I feel about this. No, I can't. And my mother definitely wouldn't approve if I lived with her. I doubt that she would even agree." "Dad, it was Mom's idea. She explained everything to us, and it makes sense. The day you are discharged from the hospital, you will go to Mom. She is already preparing a room for you with the same portable potty as here. She has already submitted an application for 2 weeks leave to help you through the most difficult time, after which either Cheryl or I will be with you during the day, and Mom will look after you in the evenings," Sue explained. "I don't know, girls. Maybe there is some other way out," I asked. "No, Dad, there is no other way. You can't be left alone, and we don't have the funds to pay for a nurse 24 hours a day. Are you afraid of Mom?" Cheryl smiled. "No, I'm not afraid of your mother. Look, we're not going to get back together. As soon as I can walk, I'll go back to my apartment." "Understand," I said. "Yes, of course, Dad, we understand," Sue said. For some reason, I remembered Mike's list of words about women. Somehow her "understood" sounded too significant. I definitely felt that there was something hidden in her understanding. The girls changed the subject and started telling me about their children. They said that I would see them almost every day while I lived with their mother. This part made me happy. I loved watching them play, even though I knew I wouldn't be able to hold them for a while. While we were talking, 2 women I didn't know came in. "Are you Mr. Mathias?" they asked. "Yes, ladies. How can I help you?" One of them spoke up. "My name is Betty Porter. I'm Jason's mother, and this is Marcia Watts, Brad's mother. We just wanted to stop by and thank you for saving our sons. We're so sorry they acted the way they did and, of course, put you at risk. Danger. We want you to know that when they return home, we will punish them. We will take everything they have from them. Thanks, ladies. Perhaps you should find out where they get their alcohol. After all, they were only 19 and they were pretty drunk. If they hadn't been drinking, they wouldn't have acted like that. Thanks for coming. I know that it wasn't easy." I introduced them to Cheryl and Sue, and they also apologized to them. We all talked for a few minutes, and the women left. I had visitors all day. When Brenda returned, the girls went home to take care of their families. It's worth mentioning that both guys were found guilty of trespassing. The company sued them, but offered to punish them with community service. The judge agreed and ordered each of them 60 hours of community service. Now they are planting trees for our company. They were also given strict punishment that if they were caught drinking alcohol again, they would face 6 months in prison. Later, when Brenda returned, I told her I had a problem, and she asked what happened. I replied that I needed to go to the toilet and had no idea what to do. I really didn't want to embarrass myself and ruin the bed. Brenda walked out and called the nurse, who came in, lowered my leg, and began helping me onto the porta-potty. I asked Brenda to step outside for a few minutes. She looked at me in disbelief, shrugged her shoulders, closed the curtain and the door. My leg hurt like hell while I was trying to sit on the potty. I was glad that the nurse was there to help me. It was a little awkward, but the nurse said you could get used to it. Finally, he helped me back to bed and Brenda returned to the room as the nurse emptied the potty into the toilet. And then I asked her if she was sure that she wanted to see me at her home. After all, in such situations, she will have to help me. I admitted that I would depend on her help until my leg healed. Rob, you need help, and we both know it, just like the girls. Yes, I'm ready to look after you and help you get back on your feet faster, she answered me. I hate to bring this up, but you know I'm not going to marry you again, right? I asked carefully. She looked at me and replied, okay, that's normal. Then she said she was going to get a cup of coffee. Okay, that's normal. That's what she said. Again, I wondered if these were words from Mike's list. The fine and fine that Brenda said sounded completely unconvincing. I thought that by the time I left this hospital, Brenda and my daughters would have a whole new set of words. I was too tired and sick to argue with them. My friend Mike came in, and I asked him about his list of feminine words. He said he always carries it with him so that when he talks to his wife, he has something to refer to. Listen, Mike, are the words correct and normal on this list? There is no word right, but I have a feeling that there should be one. I heard Raisin say this several times, and then it meant that I was wrong. And normal is on the list, which means that the conversation is not over yet. Mike laughed. He then added the word correct to his list. Various people came to see me throughout the day, and I was glad when visiting hours ended. Lying here took too much energy from me. The nurse brought me the pills, and then Brenda came in again. What are you doing here? Aren't you going home today? No, I'll stay one more night. Tomorrow evening, I will have to leave because I have to go to work in the morning. I just wanted to make sure you were okay. Brenda, I want to thank you for. I know, Rob. Just rest. Good night, she said, sitting down in a chair. I couldn't stop thinking about her. I had so little control over what was happening in my life. It's hard to believe that she is still here next to me. It's been more than 9 years since we got divorced. The next morning, I woke up to find Brenda sleeping. I must have made some noise and woke her up. Is everything okay, Rob? She asked. Not really. I need to go to the toilet like a racehorse, but I can't reach this bottle. She came over and brought me a bottle. I was lying on my back and could hardly see my damn dignity. Brenda laughed at my situation, walked over, and lifted my hospital gown. I felt a little embarrassed that Brenda was holding me. Don't worry, Rob. Nothing that I haven't already seen, she smiled. I started to relax, and I really felt better. Brenda held the bottle while I freed myself. When I finished, she shook it a little, and I felt a little excited. Hey, stop it. What are you doing? I asked. She laughed. Don't you always shake him a little after going to the toilet? Yes, but I'm shaking, not pumping, I answered, laughing. Then I went to the toilet to empty the contents of the bottle, and at that moment a nurse entered the room with my breakfast. Brenda went to the sink and washed her hands. Then I again met many visitors. I didn't know I had so many friends. Even some of our mutual friends, like Joyce and Ellen, came to visit me. My boss Matt came and told me to take as much time as I needed to recover. He said that I had done more for the coal industry than anyone in recent years. First I gave a lecture, and then I saved the lives of 2 students. Before he left, he said that I had a visitor in the mine. It was the woman from the lecture. She came to visit me. You mean the teacher, Miss Smiley? I asked. No, the other one you had lunch with. She said her name was Mary and asked me to say hi to you, and that she hoped you were doing well. She also said that her offer is still valid. Brenda returned to the room and seemed to hear the end of her conversation with Matt. She had known Matt for years and hugged him and kissed him on the cheek. They exchanged a few words and Matt left. Brenda half smiled at me. So what proposal did this Mary make you? I decided to answer honestly. She said that if I needed someone to talk to or sleep with, she was available. Without batting an eyelid, Brenda said, "Ha, I can help you with both, and perhaps even better." She laughed. I decided to change the subject, realizing that I had just lost again. Before Brenda went home that evening, she placed the urine bag where I could easily reach it. She knew I would need it first thing in the morning. She knew me as well as I knew myself. Before she left, she kissed my forehead. "Good night, Rob. Hope you have a good night's sleep. See you tomorrow after work." The next morning, I found myself looking at an empty chair, and for the first time I felt a slight sadness that she was not there. I reached for the bottle Brenda had left for me, used it, and placed it on the mobile table for the nurse to put away later. The next few days went pretty much the same way. My daughters and friends came to see me every day. Brenda came in every evening after work and stayed until visiting hours ended. One day, the doctor informed me that I would be allowed to go home the next day. I was now allowed to lower my leg, but it had to remain elevated on the cushions, and I still had to avoid standing on it. My brothers-in-law picked me up from the hospital. They helped me into the wheelchair and into the van. My daughters, I must admit, chose worthy husbands for themselves. When we got to Brenda's house, the brothers-in-law used the chair again to carry me inside. The house wasn't very wheelchair-friendly, so once inside the house, they carried me into the bedroom and helped me onto the bed. "Brenda, this is your room. I can't take over your bedroom." "Rob, just relax. I'll sleep in the guest room in Sue's room. My room is bigger, and there is a TV. You'll be here for most of the next 2 weeks," Brenda said. My daughter intervened. "Dad, Mom, Sue and I know what's best for you. We have everything planned. All you have to do is rest and get better. Once the cast is removed, physical therapy will begin to strengthen the leg. Don't worry, we'll be there even then," she smiled at me. I had tears in my eyes and was deeply touched by the family's support. Over the next 2 weeks, Brenda was with me 24 hours a day. She cooked me breakfast, lunch, and dinner, and remembered all my favorite dishes. In the evenings, she would sit next to me on the bed, and we would watch TV together. She had a DVD player and would rent movies that she knew I would like. One day she laughed when she brought the film Coal Miner's Daughter. I was so dependent on her. She took care of me. She never mentioned the past and did not regret anything. We talked a lot about how our children grew up and how proud we are of them. We thought we had done a great job raising them. Of course, this is mainly thanks to Brenda. The daughters were very similar to her. I wanted to mention that Brenda did absolutely everything for me, including helping me with hygiene when it was difficult for me. She joked about taking out the porta potty so I wouldn't feel embarrassed. She even enjoyed giving me sponge baths, spending a little extra time on certain parts of my body. I remember one morning she came into the room after a shower, throwing on a robe. She took it off and threw it on the floor. She was completely naked. I said, "Brenda, what are you doing?" "I'm getting dressed, stupid. All my clothes are in this room. If you don't want to look at me, close your eyes," she smiled. "You've already seen it all before." I was at a loss and didn't know what to say. I didn't close my eyes and watched her with interest while she got dressed. I began to look forward to this every morning. Every day she took a shower and sang in the bathroom. She had the most pleasant voice. Then she went into the room, took off her robe, and got dressed. 2 weeks flew by, and I was finally able to stand on my good leg. Now I could walk to the living room sofa, although I still had to keep my feet on the cushions. Brenda returned to work, but every morning before she left, she made sure I was comfortable. A couple of hours later, one of my daughters came to be with me, and they always took their grandchildren with them. One day, the phone rang, and a man asked for Brenda. I told him she was at work and wouldn't be home until 5. The man was a little upset that a man answered the phone. I was dying to ask Sue about him, but I didn't want to show any jealousy. After all, Brenda and I had been divorced for almost 10 years. "Who called, Dad?" asked Sue. "Some man named Bill wanted to talk to your mother." "Oh, I should have answered the phone. Sorry, Dad." "What do you mean you had to answer? Who is Bill?" "Okay, Dad, I'll tell you. Mom went on dates with him a couple of times. She told me that if he calls, I should say that she is back with her husband and that he should not call again. I told you that we are not going to get back together. I'm just living here until I can go back to my apartment. Is anyone listening to me? Oh yes, Dad, I forgot to say we sublease your apartment. What? Where should I live? I can't stay here forever. Dad, you had 4 months of rent left. We rented it out before the end of your term so you wouldn't have to pay rent. Phil and Bob are going to pick up your personal belongings tonight. We agreed that the new tenant could use the furniture and some other things for an additional fee of $100 a month. If you decide to return in 4 months, the apartment will be yours. Dad, be honest with yourself. Do you really want to leave your mom again? Of course, the choice is yours. We just thought it would save you a lot of money since you don't live there yet. She didn't expect an answer, but I knew I would have to think it over. When Brenda returned home, she apologized for calling Bill. She said that he is a good man, but he is looking for a wife, but she is not looking. She never explained why. Life went on as usual for another month. I soon learned to use crutches and go to the toilet by myself. It was so good to be able to do it on my own. Life wasn't bad for me. I saw a lot of friends, and of course seeing my daughters and their families almost every day was great. And here's what's surprising and touching. In these last 2 months, despite breaking my leg, I've probably been happier than I've been in the last 10 years. Being close to Brenda reminded me how much I still love her. One Saturday evening, the phone rang. Brenda and I had just had dinner. She had cooked a wonderful dinner, and we were going to watch a movie. She picked up the phone and went into the kitchen to talk. I couldn't resist and began to listen to the conversation, turning off the volume on the TV. No, not today. I'm with Rob and we're going to watch a movie. No, I don't think it will work. Okay, have a good time. We'll talk tomorrow. I quickly turned the volume back on the TV as Brenda returned, smiling. I know you were eavesdropping. Do you want to know who it was? Was it Bill? I asked. Brenda laughed. I broke up with Bill a month ago, shortly after you talked to him. It was Joyce. Tonight was our girls' night, and she wanted to know if I was coming. You should have gone. You've been stuck here with me for 2 months now. Go have a good time, I said, although deep down I really wanted her to stay with me and watch the movie. I told Joyce that if I had to choose between going out with the girls and watching a movie with you, I would choose you. She smiled. At this point, I thought about how the last couple of months had gone. She never tried to kiss me or talk about intimacy. I began to wonder if maybe she was waiting for me to make the first move. We hugged, but there was no obvious sexual connotation, except for the fact that she changed her clothes every morning in front of my eyes. I admit that I really enjoyed looking at her, and she knew it. She stood up and inserted the movie disc. She made sure my leg was comfortable and sat next to me on the sofa. But this time there was something different. She held my hand. I didn't say anything. After about an hour, she paused the movie and said she was going to make us some popcorn. We hugged, ate popcorn, and watched a movie. When it was over, I hobbled to the bedroom and got ready for bed. I heard Brenda locking up the house and then her singing in the shower. It was strange. She usually took a shower in the morning. I know I've been watching her every morning for the past 2 months. I was lying on the bed in my underpants with a pillow under my cast leg when Brenda walked into the room. She threw off her robe and came up to me. She was completely naked. She had scissors in her hands and came up to me. I was confused when she cut my panties. Brenda, what the hell is going on? Why did you cut my underwear? She put the scissors on the nightstand and returned to me, starting to gently caress me. I wanted you naked, but I didn't want to disturb your leg. I'm going to make love to you whether you like it or not. I told you that you don't have to marry me again, but I never said that you can't make love to me. She leaned over and kissed me tenderly, awakening memories of how no woman could match the warmth and tenderness that Brenda knew how to give. She came closer to me, and we felt this special unity. I tried not to move so as not to disturb my leg, but it was not easy. Brenda was caring, her movements smooth and careful. Her care and closeness helped me stay calm and focus on our feelings. I touched her, feeling the depth of our connection, Her words about love and longing added even more significance to this moment. All this led us to the moment when I felt that there was nothing between us except pure and sincere feeling. She knew how to give a moment of absolute happiness, and I completely surrendered to this feeling. After that, she got up and went to the bathroom. I took my medications and soon fell asleep, and the next morning I woke up to find Brenda cuddled up to me and lying on my arm. She looked more peaceful than ever. I didn't know what awaited us next. I truly loved her and needed her. These last 10 years have taught me that living alone is not fun at all. I may have to break my promise not to marry her again. I love her with all my heart. Only time will tell what will happen next. Subscribe to our channel so that your love doesn't cheat on you, and go ahead and listen to the next story, because this story is nothing compared to the next one. If you're under 18, don't even think, click to the next one.